Right now in Dead by Daylight, there is a new menace roaming the streets, dominating the meta and is breaking the game itself. This perk I'm sure you are all aware of, that being Made for This. Made for This is a simple perk on paper. Get a speed boost while injured and endurance when you finish healing someone. So why is this perk so game breaking and destroying everything? Dead by Daylight is designed around the core mechanic of the survivors moving around the map and interacting with the game at a base movement speed of 4 meters a second, otherwise known as 100% movement speed, which I will keep referring to it as this. Most killers move between a range of 115 to 110% movement speed, with the exception being the nurse, meaning that these killers move at 4.6 to 4.4 meters a second by default. Now, the whole game is created to play with these numbers in mind, from loops to powers to the size of the maps. However, when you bring in a new mechanic that essentially permanently bumps up the survivor's movement speed to 103%, everything starts getting worse for the killer, and I mean everything. See, while a 3% movement speed doesn't sound like a lot at all, that is 1/5 of a typical killer's movement speed, which should never happen, as this then further widens the gap between being able to use your power and catch up to survivors. This then makes it about twice as worse for other slower killers who move at 110% movement speed like Huntress, Deathslinger, etc. There's even early test footage of a map showing off loop sizes, because this is how the game is meant to be played with, and shows off stuff like how quickly a killer can catch up to a survivor, or how their power works in a loop or in chases, etc. Made for This is a fundamentally overpowered perk in every sense of the word, and there is no way to argue against that fact. While injured, you become 3% faster, and for the vast majority of the match, you are typically injured, or against some killers, always injured, like if you're playing against a Legion or Plague, who are great at making sure lots of survivors are injured all at once. So now, if they would like to use their power, they will actively become worse in chase due to using it. Do you see how busted that is? See, for some of the more overpowered perks in Dead by Daylight, they usually have an either incredibly hard way to activate it, or an annoying way to use them. Dead hard / off the record, you need to be unhooked to use them, meaning that you get this 2 times a match and are in danger when these perks are in effect. Devour Hope and Noed are reliant on Totem, meaning that survivors can shut down your perk entirely before you can even use it, and then in the case of Devour Hope, you need to hook a survivor, then be far enough away to gain a token and keep gaining tokens until your power actually gets stronger. Pain Resonance / Pop Goes the Weasel, you have to hook a survivor, meaning that there are limited uses for these perks and even more so for Pain Resonance. However, the only requirement for Made for This is just to be injured and not exhausted. To say this is incredibly simple is an understatement, since again, there are many killers who can keep people injured for the entirety of the match, or survivors will just not want to heal against the killer, like say Leatherface, since the chainsaw instantly downs them anyways, so healing isn't as important. If we look at other perks or other things that give haste, they all typically have some difficult way to activate them, like Blood Pact only works if you heal or are healed by the obsession and then stay very close to them. Breakout only works when you're near a carried survivor, Hope only works in the endgame, meaning it only lasts a few minutes, and Devour Hope needs you to get tokens before it activates for 10 seconds. Machine Learning makes you go through a whole wall of text to use it, etc, etc. You get my point. Haste is easily one of the most important and probably strongest stat effects in Dead by Daylight due to how much it changes every single loop and interaction in the game. Say you could only loop around a pallet 3 times before they caught up to you, but with Made for This, you could easily squeeze in a 4th or maybe even 5th loop around it. This perk is incredibly easy to use, has no real downside, and gives an incredibly strong stats effect, an unholy trio. So then, most if not all killers in Dead by Daylight have some form of slowdown when they use their power, like say reloading, readying the power, placing down a trap, etc. Meaning that if you do want to use your power in chase, you have to slow down in order to catch them or down them. And if you decide to do this against an injured survivor, well, now you're making it even harder to use your power. Today I was playing some of the 110 killers like Deathslinger and Trickster, and man, it is damn near impossible to catch up to a survivor like that. A combo of already being slower than other killers, using your power making you slower, and the survivors can now move faster. What is someone realistically supposed to do? This makes it impossible for killers who rely on their power in a loop to actually catch up. Take for example, someone like Ghostface or Legion, who has no real in-chase power and is basically just an M1 killer. They have no way to catch up to them quickly and have to keep running till they get into chase and can get bloodlust. Or if you're a killer who needs to hold your power in a loop like Nemesis, Wesker, Demogorgon, it becomes easier for them to both dodge your power or just straight up outrun you. See, in Nemesis's case, at level 3 he moved at 100% movement speed so that he could be at 1-to-1 movement speed when holding his power against a survivor, which is a very nice buff. But now you would be losing ground, due to the survivor literally just being injured, aka the thing you want. I genuinely could see exposed or instant down killers starting to be more relevant due to this issue, since if they're fully healed, it is easier to deal with them, which makes no sense at all. Typically, an injured survivor is supposed to be the easy one to deal with since you only have to hit them once, but now, with perks like Made for This and Resilience, they are better than a healthy survivor. This perk not only makes it much harder for killers to use their power, but makes it nigh impossible for M1 killers to ever catch up to them on a good map. Like, there's nothing a Myers or Doctor can do to deal with this. Since they don't have any form of dash or teleport or anything like that, all the Made for This user has to do is hold W, and they are just 10 times better than a typical survivor. The only thing that the killer can do is hold W and press M1, which means they have no real option. The only real quote-unquote downside or counter to this perk is the fact that survivors cannot be exhausted for this perk to be in effect, sort of like a pseudo-exhaustion perk. However, you need to apply exhaustion to them, since this perk doesn't apply exhaustion to the user, unlike how perks like Sprint Burst or Lithe make you exhausted. So it has an indefinite amount of uptime, unlike most perks. So exhaust is a fairly common status effect, since most killers have some form of add-on that applies it. However, if you're playing a killer who doesn't have that, like say Oni, you'd then have to rely on perks like Blood Echo or Fearmonger. However, there is still an issue with it. The problem being that exhaust is still a fairly easy status effect to get rid of, just by hiding, doing objectives, or just walking around. Then Blood Echo won't work on a survivor who is fully healed, so it won't even work on them. And then Fearmonger only lasts for 5 seconds. Fearmonger is a great perk at countering exhaustion perks, since it pauses the exhaust timer so it messes up things like Lithe and Sprint Burst. But since Made for This doesn't apply exhaust, this doesn't really do much, since 5 seconds in a loop is fairly easy to manage through pallets or vaults. And that's still not even the strongest thing about Made for This. There's the fact that it stacks with other speed boosts, the most obvious and common one being Hope. And man, I remember when nobody used Hope, but now it genuinely might be a bit too strong. I remember I made a video talking about how close it would be to start moving as fast, if not faster than the killer in a normal match, and here we are. And if you compare it with Refined Serum and Hope, you would get a 14% speed boost. That's why I'm afraid of this perk, because even buffing it to 3 or 4% means that you can now move faster than the killer. A free 10% speed boost is objectively too much and makes half the roster genuinely just unwinnable as. There is nothing you can do as some killers if someone is running Made for This Hope. The amount of people I've seen use Made for This Hope Resilience is astounding, and it is so incredibly unfun to play against as it takes ages to both get into a chase and then actually be able to use your power and down them. And again, yes, while Hope is limited to the endgame, meaning that it's only in effect for about 3-4 minutes tops, it still is 7% movement speed. And if your argument is just, oh, it only activates in the endgame, so it's not that strong, look at Adrenaline. Adrenaline is easily one of the best perks in the entire game. Now imagine if you get a movement speed buff that is basically half, if not more, than the killer's movement speed, paired with an infinitely lasting speed boost that lasts throughout the whole trial. You can see why this perk is genuinely breaking the game. So, to summarize, a free infinite speed boost that hard counters 80% of the killers in the game with no real easy way to shut it down. So, how would I fix it? Pretty simple. My first idea is make it work like Lucky Break. It for some reason has a free endurance effect while healing, so why not make it so that while you are injured, you get 60 seconds of a speed boost that can be replenished by healing, just like how Lucky Break's effect can be replenished through healing. My second idea is make it only apply for a bit after becoming injured, then they become exhausted. Sort of like a reverse Overcome, where instead of getting a quick big speed boost, you get a smaller, longer lasting speed boost. My final idea would be that you get this speed boost after healing a survivor and you're injured, so it's harder to activate while getting a good status. I thought of this idea because there are many times in Dead by Daylight where you finish healing the other survivor and the killer starts coming, however, you didn't have enough time to get healed by the other survivor, so now you can at least run away with a slightly larger speed boost. Personally, I would say this meta is far worse than the Call of Overcharge meta, due to the fact that killers genuinely cannot play the game or use their powers. While yes, that meta was incredibly boring and unfun for the survivors, this current one is just straight up not balanced for killers at all and makes half the roster not playable if you're not a fast killer like Blight, Spirit, Wesker, etc. Because if you're a fast killer like Nurse, it doesn't really matter how fast the survivors are moving because you can just instantly run up and hit them. All this perk does is further widen the strength gap between the 115 and 110 killers, where the weak killers are punished by this perk and the strong killers aren't really affected. Because if you're moving 3% faster against a Blight, who cares? It's the Blight, the fastest killer in the game. Honestly, try playing as an M1 killer like Ghostface or Myers for a bit and see how well it goes, because I feel like this perk has a 50 to 60% pick rate, so you'll 100% run into it within 2 matches. I don't see how behavior would allow this perk to get even past phase 1 of testing, with how busted it is. I mean, if you think about this perk for even 5 seconds, you can see how OP it is just by itself. A 3% infinite movement speed boost while you're injured, and half the game you're injured. Then you can still combine it with things like Hope and the Serum, so you start moving faster than the killer can. Like, really? I would say I hope this gets nerfed next patch, but the PTB notes are out and the PTB is out, and yeah. Well, with that being said and done, take care of yourselves and have yourselves a damn good one. Peace.